War and Paradise by Suzy Yaraei. Chapter 1. The Waiting Room and Lion. A shadow swept over my deck. I looked up, but there was not a cloud in sight. That's strange, I thought, as I began to drift off to sleep. In those half-conscious moments, I imagined great eagles flying above our home. When I awoke, it was dusk. I walked across the deck and opened the sunroom door. I was practically blinded by a bright light. "Honey, what's going on?" I called. No one answered. Maybe he's working on those kitchen lights that keep shorting out. I squinted and shouted again, "Honey, hello!" When I stepped into the sunroom, the light cleared. Then the sunroom, along with the rest of the house, was gone. I saw a valley in front of me, and at my feet was a faded blue sidewalk made of recently polished stones. The sidewalk was very beautiful, and it was moving, beckoning me. I stepped onto it, and it carried me into another dimension. I heard a voice say, "Follow the blue brick road." I saw a mansion in the distance. "This old stone road of revelation will take you down many other paths," the voice continued. "Pay attention and learn all you can from this first epic journey." I began to walk on the moving blue brick road, and it pulled the mansion toward me until I could see it up close, wavering like a mirage. It was a reflection. A sea lay between the mansion and me, a red sea, and the mansion was mirrored there in the crimson water in front of me. It was so beautiful, set perfectly with all varieties of precious gemstones and jewels. There were so many different types, each with its own unique settings, built into the outer walls of the castle. I saw eyes in the jewels, alive and keeping watch. I looked up to see a huge drawbridge come down across the castle moat with a loud, long creaking. A red carpet rolled out thousands of feet and stopped right in front of me. I noticed that I had an ugly brownish gray cloak on my shoulders, made out of some kind of heavy tarp material. I stepped onto the carpet, and it squished under my feet like soggy grass. My shoes were instantly stained red. Jesus appeared in front of me. "The path of blood is the path of the cross," he said. As he spoke, blood sprayed out of his mouth like a mist. It stuck to me. It stuck to my cloak like ruby red crystals winking up at me. What should have been horrible was actually very beautiful. As he walked past me smiling, he brushed my shoulder, and I felt his strength shock me. I continued walking slowly up to the castle on the blood-soaked grass carpet and entered through the drawbridge arch. The most beautiful people were walking peacefully around the entry chamber. The entire room was carpeted in the red, soggy grass, and the feet of all these lovely people were stained and dripping red. "You walk on the blood of the saints that went before you. Follow their path." It was Jesus' voice. "Take your shoes off," he said. I pulled off my boots and looked around the room. The people were so very lovely, with white and golden hair and piercing eyes of the brightest silver blue. They all looked at me and smiled as I entered the room. "Who are they?" I asked. "These are the very beautiful ones, my saints, the welcoming committee. Welcome to the waiting room," Jesus said. He had never really left me, though I could not always see him. The saints embraced me with their smiles, and the light in their eyes drew me in. I was flooded with peace and awe. I looked around and saw 4 very wide, curved staircases leading up to the next floor, which contained many doors. I stood staring, wondering what was behind them, but something inside of me said to wait. I sensed there was a different way for me. I looked toward the back of the waiting room and saw a tiny blue door. It was open, and through it I could barely make out an old spiral iron stairway. Just then I heard a commotion. I turned in the direction of the sound and saw a crowd of people rushing over the drawbridge. At first I thought they were demons. They were so bedraggled and ugly, carrying old, dirty weapons. They rushed through the waiting room, right past the saints, and up the great winding stairs, clambering over each other to get to the top. In my haste to get out of the way, I hid in a corner behind one of the stairways, still able to see. The saints just kept moving around as if they were waiting. I realized the crowd that rushed in was not demons at all, but real people. In fact, they were Christians. When they arrived and saw the great staircases, they presumed it was the right way to go and rushed up them. They passed the waiting room and did not even see the saints or the fact that their dirty shoes were now stained blood red. The waiting room grew perfectly still all at once. The saints watched the people who, still oblivious, were looking around on the second floor. They knocked on the doors and then, out of impatience, when there was no answer, kicked them open. They were shocked to find the doors flimsy, almost like cardboard, with nothing on the other side. I noticed this at the same time they did, and saw that the staircases were very flimsy as well, sagging now from the weight of the crowd. It was all like a fake movie set. They began to come down the stairs slower than before, careful lest the steps cave in. I saw how weary and discouraged they were. Most of them passed right by the saints again, without seeing them, because they were so tired. They hung their heads down. They never even looked up. They went straight back out over the drawbridge. Then I saw that a few had stopped. Once they looked up, they could see more clearly. They saw the saints and the red soggy carpet and began to sob desperately. They sat down on benches lining the walls and cried. This is what the saints had been awaiting, for these worn-out soldiers to stop and wait. I noticed one man sitting alone. He wore a sky blue shirt and dark blue slacks, old work boots, and a black suit jacket, all worn, but still possessing a faint gleam of the shiny material they once were. His tie hung like an old tattered noose around his neck. He looked like he wanted to cry but could not. Yet he sat there waiting, as if he knew something was coming. Then I recognized him as a great prophet healer in my day that had fallen into sin. I went to him. It seemed that if you stopped and waited in this room, you would know what to do. Things would begin to happen. Good things. Then I knew I was to wash his feet. I took off his red-stained boots and burst into tears when I saw his feet. They were cracked, bleeding, and terribly disfigured, as if he had been tortured. I knew in my spirit that these feet, which had once brought the good news of Jesus to so many, had been used and deceived and ruined by the enemy's plans and lies. I could not fathom how he could have walked on them and even made it to this refuge. A saint brought me a pitcher of water and a pitcher of what looked like blood. I poured some of each on both of his feet. Another saint handed me the softest brush I had ever felt. I was impressed to brush his feet and then his clothes. I dipped the brush into both buckets, staining his skin and clothes red. Suddenly it was raining right on this great fallen man of God, washing the blood away. I looked up to see a cloud directly over his head. Incredibly, it was raining only on him. Now he began to cry, whimpering at first, until it grew into a deep wailing and then a blood-curdling scream. At this point, I heard a tremendous roar of thunder. The saints all began singing a song in many different languages with some English mixed in. It was the most amazing song about cleansing. Even though it was in many languages, I knew it was the same song. It almost sounded like a Broadway song. Angels flew in from all directions to join in this lively song. The saints were literally lifted up on the song as soon as the angels joined in. Oh, come with your perfect tongues of fire and cleanse this man of your own. Reign and roar and lift him higher. Father, lights from your throne. Come with your many brushes, come with your staining soap, refiner, refresher, restorer of all, come and wash with your hope. The cloud over this crying man was pouring down on him, and the rain had spread to include the others who stayed, soaking them through. I heard the booming thunder again. The room had suddenly stretched and expanded until it was enormous beyond comprehension. I was like a little dot at this man's feet, and he was a dot on a long, long bench. Angels and saints danced and flew everywhere with great ecstasy and joy, singing and celebrating as if expecting something. I looked up. At the top of the cloud was a being. I began to feel a terrible, wonderful fear. I knew this being somehow. He had the head of a lion, and he was on fire from the waist down. His arms were huge and muscular. He roared, and it was the thunder I had heard. It went through me like an earthquake. I fell down on my face, full of a combination of wonder and fear that I had never known. I loved the feeling and wanted more, but at the same time, I felt it would surely kill me, and I didn't care if it did. I felt a nudge at my shoulder. My head was enveloped in a vapor, and I felt hot breath on my neck. I was terrified to turn my head. The lion being was standing next to me. In my fear and ecstasy, I did not want to open my eyes, so I stood for a few seconds and waited. It seemed like an eternity, and it may very well have been. He nudged me again. Love hit me and flowed over me like an ocean, waves of indescribable love, making me want to laugh out loud hilariously. I opened my eyes. I was face to face with what I am positive would be the most enormous lion in the known universe, if there were such a creature. His head was immense, and he was looking straight into my eyes, burning through me like a drill. His eyes were like tunnels of eternity, full of light, pushing through me forever, and at the same time backing me into the ages. I basked in those eyes of never-ending mercy and compassion beyond comprehension, burning and burning. I had a fleeting thought that he was surely keeping me alive by his love power, keeping me from burning up under his gaze. He nudged me to move over so he could get to the crying man who was cowering in fear at the presence of this lion in front of him. Caught up in my own experience, I had forgotten all about the man. The very one the lion had come for. The very one the lion's thundercloud had rained on first. I thought he must love this man very much. The lion began to lick him all over, and the man shuddered, shaking and crying even louder than before. I thought he would die of weeping, that no one could live through that level of grief. The saints and angels went into a new level of celebration. Again, I felt the room growing while the lion continued to lick the man's wounds. We were now just tiny specks in this vast chamber. I was in a state of euphoria as I watched this scene. I was mesmerized by the lion and his tremendous size, filled with terrifying love. It was an unfamiliar combination, terror and love. But it was a good terror, a lovely terror I wanted to roll in. So massive, the lion was larger than an elephant, much larger than any earthly lion. His head was the most frighteningly beautiful thing anyone could ever look upon. His eyes pierced right through to my very core, burning hot coals of the sweetest fire. The fire of passion and love was beyond the heights of any heaven or the depths of any sea. But the thing that caught my attention the most was his fur. It was alive. It beckoned with soft, whispering waves for me to come closer. I was waiting, holding back, longing to go to him and touch his fur, to bury myself in his mane and feel his hot breath on my face. But I waited and watched. I did not want to disturb the cleansing celebration as the angels and saints sang on. Oh, come with your perfect tongues of fire and cleanse this man of your own. Taste of his wounds and lift him higher as he cries for his lost life alone. Come, great Father, heaven's keeper, come, great cleansing, burning sweeper. Bring him into the new way to you, glimmering clean, purified true. You are forgiveness, your joy flames in us, your scrubbing angels and saints of love make merry storms rain and leave the fresh dew. Oh, come with your perfect tongues of fire, come and cleanse through and through. The lion stepped back from the man, who looked 20 years younger at least. His hair was now dark brown and full. A great cheer arose from the saints and angels. The throng then went to work on the rest of the people who had stayed, washing and brushing them as they cried great tears of pain, relief, and joy. The lion and I sat at the man's feet, which were now like new, with perfect skin and beautiful toenails. He got up and stepped into the red carpet, instantly staining his restored feet. He looked at both of us with deep gratefulness. We all walked together toward the drawbridge. We watched him as he walked back down the blue brick road with humility and confidence, a combination so beautiful and rare. He wore a brown tarp-like cloak that was a bit too small. The other Christians who had run up the stairs and then left were far away at the end of the blue road. Most of them cheered when they saw the man walking toward them. However, some did not. I knew he would teach them all about his experience, and they would have another chance to be cleansed. They would be offered many chances to come back to the waiting room. I turned to look at the lion standing next to me. I looked into his eyes and was paralyzed. I never wanted to move from this moment. I managed to reach my hand up to his mammoth mouth and turn up my palm. He licked it with his tongue, which was at least 8 times the size of my hand. He beckoned me with his kind eyes to pet him. He wanted me to pet him. I felt like I had waited for this moment all my life. He laid down so I could reach him better and bowed his great head to me. I started crying as I stretched out my hand and touched his mane. A wave of comfort beyond description swept through me. My hand melted into his fur, and it wrapped around my fingers with a life of its own. Before I could even think, I threw my arms around his head, as best I could due to the enormity of it. I buried my whole face in that living mane. Somewhere deep inside, I was still terrified, but I could not hold back the desire to be all over him and sink into his fur. He was purring. The sound was like ripples of heat emanating out of him. It rumbled louder and louder through the mighty hall, penetrating every being there. The feeling of tangible contentment rolled out of him and all around. His contentment at being touched was touching us all. Touching him was touching the others. We all began to sing, Lion of Judah, Lion of praise, love is exuding, O Ancient of Days. Lion of Judah, Lion of praise, love is exuding, O Ancient of Days. Facing the lion and burying my own face in his living fur was the most wonderful feeling I had ever experienced. I could not imagine more. It was wonderment and awe mixed with an indescribable relief and rest, peace and security, safety and assurance. Blessed assurance. I stood in front of his vast head, his eyes gleaming down at me, his purring still resounding in the waiting room. All of a sudden, everything stood stark still. Call me Lion, he purred like a hot radiator. Lion, I repeated in a daze. "Look at yourself," he growled again with buttery pleasure. I had completely changed. I looked like I was around 18 years old, though I was still my real age. I resembled Joan of Arc. My reddish-brown hair was cropped short. I had an old muddy gray long-sleeved tunic with a vest of tarnished silver mail. I wore thick pants like tights and leather knee boots that were supple and light. I knew I could run fast and quietly in them, and they would serve me well. My sword was solid gold and very light, with a handle made of 2 green ornate leaves. It looked like a curved branch. "For the healing of the nations," he said. "Of course," I replied. "The leaves on the trees are for the healing of the nations." I noticed my cloak was gone, and I remembered the man leaving the waiting room with a cloak around his shoulders that looked too small for him. He was wearing my cloak. What an honor! Several saints suddenly appeared with a new cloak for me. It was much the same as the old one, only it was a lighter weight material and much longer, touching my ankles. Lyon began to walk away. I did not want him to go, but I knew I would see him again. He glanced back and his great eyes glowed as he looked at me and disappeared. I swear he smiled. I stood there in silence with the saints and angels. We stared at the place where Lyon had been standing. We felt like we had more love permeating our beings now than before he came. I noticed I was standing not too far from the little doorway leading to the old metal spiral staircase. I headed toward the open blue door. As I walked toward it, I realized I was farther away from it than I thought. The waiting room was eternally expanding as Lyon occupied it. It took me at least 30 minutes to get to the threshold. I felt a sweep of unnatural fear as I looked in.